It's so great to have, it looks like just more than 110 or so folks here with us today. I hope that you and your families had a great weekend. I'm happy to join you this afternoon with members of our team to answer questions that have been sent in regards to our updated return to school plan. Given our numbers, this is not a great forum to take live questions with now just about 120 people. So hopefully your questions are answered over the course of this next little bit. If your question is not answered on the call and it deals with a big picture sort of school-wide issue, I hope that you'll connect with me or Ryan individually. If it's a divisional detail question, I hope that you'll submit it to be answered during one of the divisional Zooms. We did look at all the divisional questions already submitted, and some of them will certainly be addressed today. I continue to be so thankful for all the feedback from our families. I've appreciated the things that you've loved about our return to school plan. I've appreciated hearing your concerns and know that your input continues to help us shape this plan. I'll also say that as good as our plan might be, we know that it does not guarantee that we will not have things that we need to deal with this fall. Like you, this is the first time for us in this situation. Know, as I've noted before, that this plan remains fluid. You know, from August 6th or 8th, whichever was our the first day or July, I should say, the first time the plan came out, we made changes just a couple days later, and I'm sure that we will continue to make changes as we get new information. Maine is giving us guidance every 2 weeks. Last Friday was the second time that they did a county by county color, and so we continue to get that information. Those of you, you know, masks was one last week where there was lots of different discussions about different kinds of masks and things like that. So know that we pay constant attention and that we are implementing those things into our plan to the best of our ability. It's my hope as we think about the plan, and I'm sorry for folks who have heard me say this before, but is to create as many layers and measures of precautions as we can. So that no one precaution has to stand alone. I've used the analogy of Swiss cheese, where, you know, if you're like me and you buy the Swiss cheese from the deli, if you know, you hold up one slice and there are holes in that Swiss cheese, but when you hold up the 8 slices or whatever you buy, you know, that you can't see all the way through it. And I think as we think about all of the different layers of safety precautions and planning, I think it's to just continuously overlay and overlay and overlay more plans to make us as safe as possible, as the safety of our students and faculty and staff is at the front of my mind all the time as we hone in on our plan to return to school. Speaking of faculty, many of whom I see on the call, we shared this update just before it went out to parents with our faculty last week and held a Zoom to answer questions, to answer the faculty's questions. Unbelievably, we begin our faculty meetings starting with new faculty on Monday and Tuesday of next week, followed by full faculty starting on Wednesday. And so we'll have a gradual reentry for the faculty sort of over next week into the beginning of that next week, last week of August, first week of September, ahead of those first 3 days of school starting on September 2nd. Please allow me to return to the word partnership that I talked about earlier this summer. Later this week, I will share our community expectations as we all play a role in our success this fall. You know, given that we are now, 16 days away from beginning school, I ask us all to be incredibly mindful of how our actions impact the whole community. And that will be a common theme for me this fall, and that, you know, we are, as you know, one Berwick, and, you know, we have 540 some students and so many families, but it really is going to take all of us being thoughtful about our actions in school and out of school. With that being said, let me jump into some questions posed on the Google Doc, and we've tried to group similar questions, and because there were definitely questions that came up in groups. First, a little bit about our methodology, just to repeat that we continue to use local and national guidelines, which continue to evolve. I'd like to thank Doctors Arul Mahadevan, who I believe is on the call, and Lucas Combe for speaking with us last week and answering questions and offering feedback on our plan. You've seen the word podding in our materials, and I want to talk just for a second about just sort of our methodology. And so in the lower school, of course, in pre-K through 4, this year we have, one section per grade. And so it's very natural in the lower school that we, that they naturally sort of line up in a pod. We've also in 5th and 6th grade have the kids are traditionally together for much of the day, and we will continue to take advantage of that. And then both in sort of 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th grade, to the most of our, to as much as we can, we have tried to keep the kids in groups for multiple classes. And that is all about contact tracing. So as we know that there may be a moment where we need to do contact tracing, we wanted to simplify things as much as possible. And so by creating these groups when we could, it will allow us to, to keep those traces down. Now, is it perfect? It's not perfect. But again, it's a layer, as I talked about before. And so as we think about some of the questions, you might hear us say a class or a grade or a pod. And so we've sort of been using a podding mentality as opposed to this is what clearly defines a pod. I would also say that, we know that the fall and our ability to be outside and take advantage of open windows and all those things gives us, really the best opportunity to start in person. And so we're excited to take advantage of the weather this fall. I think in the next day or so, the tent that's been dubbed, I guess, the Hilltopper will arrive, and Jason was walking me through its dimensions this morning, and it's going to be, a great space for us to use on Fog Field, and someone's told me it's bigger than the Blue Gym, the field house, in terms of about 25,000 square feet. And I think as I get into these questions, knowing that we may need to shift, and it could be a planned shift. We might know that, hey, at the end of Thanksgiving or at the end of this time, we're going to shift, or, we might have to shift more quickly if it's out of our control. And so, especially as we get closer to the winter months, and so we're going to pay attention to those things. There were questions about communication and how often and to whom are we going to communicate. And so what I've said to the team internally is that, in the beginning, I think over communicating is going to be really important. It's going to be important for us, again, thinking about the lower school and middle school homeroom teachers and that we're communicating often, but certainly, as we think about positive cases, kids who are at probable cases, or kids who are experiencing symptoms, I think that we want to set up a system very early on that parents are hearing from us. And I think if we start from sort of the most extreme of those cases, which is a positive case, positive test for COVID-19, I think everyone in the school community, should expect to hear if we have a positive case, and we will communicate that, whether that's a student or a faculty and staff member. I think if there's a family member of a student, that's something that I think we will communicate. Certainly as it, as it sort of impacts contacts for that family. And that's something that we're also just talking about around some of the health guidelines. But we will certainly communicate school-wide anytime, knock on wood, that there's a positive diagnosis. As we get smaller, I think that, so if we go from the whole school to a division, I think that we will have different communications within divisions. If there is, if there's more sickness that's going around, but not necessarily positive testing. So we go from sort of the whole school to divisions to classes or pods, if you will. But my goal is that I don't want to communicate so much that you don't keep paying attention to the emails, but I want to communicate certainly in the beginning as much as we can and as quickly as we can, so that parents know exactly what's going on. In the positive test case protocol, someone asked about siblings. So if you have a sibling in the school and one of the siblings tests positive, the question was about, would that student need to quarantine sort of along with their sibling? And the answer to that question is yes, currently, is if your sibling tests positive, that child in question, the non-positive sibling would also need to quarantine. People asked about, well, if there's a one positive case in a class or a pod, does that wipe out the whole pod? Would the whole class or pod need to quarantine? And the answer right now for that is no. What we would do in that case is that, as you all know, we're going to be doing daily health checks. And so in the morning before kids leave for school, parents will need to certify the student doesn't have a fever, the student is non-symptomatic, and they'll be part of an app through Magnus where families will daily certify and do that. If someone is in proximity, so let's say you were in a class of 15 and there was someone who tested positive, those kids then at that point go into a protocol where we'd be testing their temperature at school as well. And so we would have a temperature check in the morning where we would need to just have that temperature verified, non-fever verified. And then during the day, likely at lunchtime, we will also have a temperature check for those sort of adjacent students. That's the policy that we're starting with. And so that one positive test in that class or pod does not immediately mean the whole class goes into sort of a quarantine. We are working on sort of that. We have a big chart that shows one case, two cases, three cases, and how that moves us through a class, a division, or the school. And as soon as that is ready to be published, we will share that so you can see what our methodology is going to be as we do have positive cases, knock on wood, and go from there. There was a line of questioning about mental health and just knowing that this person wrote, there's a significant emotional and psychological impact to living through a pandemic. Is there a mechanism to support these students who may need to engage in remote learning for a day or two? And so, first of all, I think I would just say that mental health and social, emotional learning for the kids is something that we're talking and thinking a lot about. There was a question in our faculty meeting the other day about how we might look at this year and know that it's been successful. And to me, that has a lot to do with healthy kids who transition well back into school, and then we will ease into school and sort of do it in a way and a tempo, I hope, that takes into account how challenging this time has been for our students. But in terms of mental health, and if a student needs to step away from school, I think, as we have done in the past, of course, we will support that student who might need a mental health day or two. I'll probably talk about in another question, but today we had, I think more than 50 or so OWL cameras show up. And these OWL cameras, if the people aren't familiar with them, are cameras that sit in the middle of a classroom, and they have a 360-degree image. And so these are the cameras that we will be using, to get out to kids. And so it's a camera that can be put in the middle of the room, and you can hear and see, whoever is speaking. And so, but know that we will definitely work with kids if they need a day or two for mental health. There were questions about choosing to be remote and remote learning while quarantined. And I think people have noted that as of right now, we have not, or I'll say it a different way, our primary delivery of our program this fall, as we get into it, will be in person. As I just mentioned, these cameras and technology, like, we are preparing ourselves to support kids through extended absences. I know that there are some families who are considering whether or not that their kids will come back. Maybe their kids themselves are immunocompromised, or someone in the household is, and we have certainly had families that have talked to us about that. I'll say again, if you find yourself in that scenario, I please ask that you speak with your division director, and so that we can have conversations directly with you. People have asked about, well, how will it compare to our remote learning from the spring? And I think our remote learning plan from the spring and our remote learning plan in our red scenario are scenarios where we take into account kids being at home, being on the screen for some percentage of the day, but not all day. And so our remote program now is, providing access to our classrooms by either viewing the class live or viewing the class recording, communicating with the teacher. All of our assignments will be in my Berwick, and so able to do that. Of course, it will be limited in terms of some of the participation and things like that. And so that's why I think we've stated that it's sort of meant to design or meant to support extended absences. I think if you do find yourself not having your child come to school, we'll want to talk to you individually about what that means and some of the challenges that might come up, and how we can work together to make the best of that situation. But we know that being on Zoom all day is not ideal and not something that we would do in a remote environment. And so I think finding that balance is important. So that's the difference in a quick nutshell about sort of last spring versus right now, where, I think this program that we have is built for that, you're out for 2 weeks, or you're out for a week, or you're out for 48 hours if you're sick and need to be fever free before you return to school. People have asked about testing, whether we were going to require testing before returning to school. And I know that many of my boarding school colleagues are using testing. And in those instances, I think those schools are trying to create and protect a bubble. And I think given that we're a day school and that families and students are coming to school and going home, we just feel like testing right now, if the lag time is 3 days or whatever the lag time is, that testing is not going to be an effective way, an effective and practical way for us. So we're not going to be requiring testing when folks come to school. There were lots of questions about sort of sick protocol, right? Because we all know kids get sick, we get sick. How will the school handle kids getting sick? And so I think that, first of all, we're going to ask you to do the daily health assessment, and we're really going to implore families to keep kids home when they're sick, even when they're sick with a common cold. We're really going to ask families, again, in that partnership way, to keep kids home from school. And we're also going to ask that families check in with their primary care physician providers, and check in and clear. We might have a student who goes home with one minor symptom or two minor symptoms. And so we're hoping that you'll check in with your primary care provider and that they will decide, well, you should have a COVID test. This sounds like COVID, or we're going to give you a flu test or a strep test. But in the beginning, know that we are going to be very conservative with people who get sick or who show symptoms at school. And we hope to just partner with families, and we hope that you understand why we're being as conservative as we're being as we get going at school. And so, but I know kids are going to get sick. And this sort of raises a random question, but faculty were talking about the remote, the cameras and things like that. And someone said, well, are the kids ever just going to be able to be sick and have a sick day or have a mental health day? And I hope so. I hope that if a student is sick with a common cold and they're out for a day or two, like they might have been in the past, that we and you, and they don't feel compelled that they need to be, even though they're sick, they need to be on the computer watching Zoom and doing that. And so, I think it's okay for kids to be sick. It's going to be okay for faculty to be sick, and we'll take advantage of the technology when we can. But if someone is sick, they should lay in bed and have the chicken soup or whatever it is, and hopefully they'll feel better soon, and we'll get them back. We'll get them back as quickly as we can. People have asked about school hours, and people may have noted that that 7:45 is sort of the time that we're hoping, the earliest time that we're hoping that folks arrive at school. As you can imagine, we have a lot of morning protocols that we're putting in place, and we're using faculty and staff in a way that we have not used faculty and staff in the morning. So multiple doors that we're using in the lower and middle school, people meeting the buses, advisors checking in upper school students under the tent. I mean, there's just so much that's happening in the morning. And to begin with, we're going to start at 7:45 and go from there. That may evolve, but that's where we're going to need to start. People have asked about Massachusetts, and will Massachusetts students be welcome back on day one? Know that we are actively working with the Department of Education, with our local government here, to come up with a plan that may include additional protocols for our folks from Massachusetts that allows our Massachusetts students to be here and be with us, to come to school, to go to school, and to go home. But that is something that we're actively working on, as I said, with the Department of Education, the Maine CDC, our local state senator, and it also sounds like the greater Massachusetts position may evolve shortly as well. And so we're sort of working both avenues. So some people had questions about lunch and the bus. And so, well, let me just start with lunch. So I think, as folks know, like, we are not going to be using the inside of the Commons as our place for gathering for lunch. We are going to be using a menu created by Sage that we will order our food a week in advance. And then on that Monday, you'll come to lunch. In the lower school, you'll have lunch in the classrooms, and so the food will be brought over, and the kids will have lunch in the classrooms. And then in the middle and upper school, we're going to use sort of the tent and fog field outside for the kids to have lunch there. We should have a number of hot options for the kids, multiple hot options to choose from, a salad option, a build your sandwich option. And so we feel like that there will still, be good, solid choices for the kids. We are going to ask that everybody use a refillable water bottle, and we're, even as I speak, sort of putting in more water bottle filling stations around campus. And so we're gonna do our very best to have all the kids have water bottles, fill them up, and use that for lunch. The single-use water bottles was not an option that I wanted to explore. In terms of buses, we, as many of you know, we asked earlier in the summer than we normally do about signing up for the bus, and that was about us figuring out, do we have the buses that we need? Can we handle the demand that we have? We, as of right now, can handle the demand that we have for buses. And so, you know, the buses will, students will need to wear a mask on the bus. Siblings may share a seat on the bus. Otherwise, there will just be one child per seat on our buses, and they will be set up in sort of a slalom, if you will. So in row 1, you might sit in the window, and row 2 in the aisle, you know, et cetera, so that we've, you know, created as much distance as we can between those kids on the bus. We're looking right now between assigned seating on the bus or what's the phrase I'm looking for? Or sort of seating by zone. So if you imagine a school bus, we may have assigned seats, or we may say, like, you sit in zone 1 all the time, you sit in zone 2 all the time, you sit in zone 3 all the time. Again, this all comes back to that moment when we need to do contact tracing and how we're going to do it. And so that's a detail that we're working out in terms of, you know, assigned seat versus zone. I think in a lot of our classes, especially where we are potting students, we will have assigned seats in classes as well for that same reason. Someone asked about our playbook, and they asked about the orange status. So the orange status is our hybrid status, where, you know, if we find ourselves in a situation where the square footage that we have on campus, you know, if the recommendation went from you know, that we could have 10 kids in a classroom to all of a sudden we can only have 5, you know, that is something that would push us into sort of our hybrid scenario, where it really means that grades 7 through 12 would each be here about half of the time in person and half of the time in a distance plan. But our K through 6 would continue to be at school. And someone asked about that. And, you know, there were a couple reasons for that to extend up until 6th grade. One was, I think, harder for a 5th or 6th grade to be home potentially alone if you're living in a household with 2 working parents. So that was something that we took into consideration there. And the other thing, and someone asked, would those students still be at school, even knowing what we know about sort of epidemiology? And what we would do is we would just spread out more, you know, and so in that 5th and 6th grade, we would just spread out. But I think we feel strongly that having school available to those kids is important. That was a response to that question. So buses, again, there was another question, like buses will be cleaned after every run. And so we'll get here to school and all the buses will go through a significant clean before they go out. And that may cause changing to the timing a little bit in the late bus, just for some of those buses turn right around. And so we may have to come back from the 3 o'clock run, do the cleaning, and then, you know, get the buses off. And so the late bus may be a few minutes later to start the school year, but then eventually tighten up sort of as we learn how fast we can clean and go from there. Someone asked about the facility, and with school 5 days a week, when will the school be clean? The school will be cleaned continuously, really, but then there'll be a deep clean, of the school every night. You know, but we will also have, you know, cleaning supplies available. And so when the kids come in and sit down, they'll have a chance to wipe off their area and do that. So I think that, you know, there'll be some partnership there. And then obviously the custodial staff will be doing a great job. We're actually going up one custodian to help with the significant increase of cleaning that we're going to need to do. Someone asked about twins, and that's a question that we've been actively talking about, especially in the middle school, I guess, where we have, multiple sections, and potentially, in the 9th and 10th grade, and that's something that Ryan has been working on. And as folks with twins know, typically or oftentimes you have twins, always have their own homeroom, always have their own space. As we think about that kids that are living in the same house in the same grade, and potentially limiting contacts there, we're having that discussion right now about the potential of having twins in the same homerooms, so that if we do get into that scenario, we're not necessarily impacting 2 classes, but more to come there. People have asked about athletics and the athletic requirements. So you may have noted from our updated plan that in the upper school, our afternoon requirement has been 2 seasons of participation. And so we are changing that for this year. And in the past, it's been 1 group activity, which might have been potentially the play or yoga or aftercare, and 1 sort of strenuous activity, which may have been dance or a sport and things like that. So we are changing that for this year, really for safety reasons, to 1 afternoon activity in any of those categories. And so, so students in the upper school, again, will have one requirement for an afternoon activity. You can certainly do 3. So this is not limiting kids from what they can do, but the requirement itself will just be one trimester. In the upper school, I'll talk a little bit about athletics for a second. We have been in the process of joining the MPA, the Maine Principals Association, as a conditional member or a new member, in order to try to have some competitions this fall. And so, so what Maine is doing is regionalizing their athletics. And so typically Maine has done their athletics by size. So you're Class A, you play Class A schools regardless of the geography. Now they're clustering schools by geography. And so for us, that means, and we're just sort of getting our certification sort of as we speak, and I know the scheduling is going to be happening shortly. For us, that means Marshwood and Noble and Sanford and York and Kittery and Wells and Kennebunk, and there may be 1 or 2 that I'm forgetting. But what it means is that for our cross country, golf, volleyball, field hockey, soccer, that we will, at the varsity and JV blue level, have a schedule. And so we don't know what that schedule is yet. We are now following MPA guidelines. And so that means the first day of tryouts is actually, of official tryouts, is that September 8th, Tuesday, September 8th. And the first games will not be until the 18th. And so stay tuned for that. If you're an upper school family with a student who has varsity aspirations or is a returning varsity player, I hope the coaches have been in touch about voluntary workouts and things that have been happening, and what the beginning of the season looks like. In the middle school, we'll have those kids out there on Tuesdays and Thursday afternoons, and I know that they're busy, creating sort of as robust a program as we can. But I don't imagine that we will have interscholastic competition at the middle school level this fall. There were questions about masks, and there was some updating about masks, and that one of the changes is that, yes, we are requiring masks. We are not supplying masks. We are asking kids and families to supply their own masks. We will have masks, of course, disposable masks for a student that has lost their mask or doesn't have their mask. And we're expecting everyone to wear them. With the fall and the good weather, I hope that we can get outside and socially distance enough that kids can have plenty of mask breaks and adults can have plenty of mask breaks. But while we're inside doing our thing, everyone's required to wear a mask. Someone asked a question about non-compliance, and I'm really hopeful that we do not have non-compliance with masks. But it's something that, I think we'll deal with, first out of a place of safety and safety for the community and our responsibility for the community. But I think part of being a part of this community this fall is wearing a mask. I have my mask at school. I was a gaiter wearer until today. And so Lucy went to, I think, every store in Dover and bought a whole bunch of different kinds of masks. And I found one that works for me. And I need something that stays with me because I lose them. And so, but we do expect everybody to wear masks. And we've created this mask policy from, CDC, local. It just, I think is the way that I read studies about washing hands and wearing masks will go an incredibly long way during this pandemic. Someone asked a question in regards to seniors and college visits, and if we're requiring seniors to quarantine for 2 weeks on college visits. The answer is no. And we do say in our return to school plan, if you're traveling commercially outside of New England, we'd love to have a conversation. We would just love to know, this is what we're doing and this is what we did. And, and then together, we hope to make the best decision that we can about the student's return to school. And I think kids need to visit colleges, and I think that we get that. I'm bringing TJ to college tomorrow, and he did not get to visit a lot of colleges because we were going to visit them all after he got in, and so I get that people need to visit colleges, but I think what we're asking for again is that partnership. And if you're like, hey, we need to go, and we're going to go to DC and we're going to visit some colleges, let's talk about it and let's get a sense of how's DC doing right now and how does that impact the student's return. But it's not an automatic 2-week quarantine from my perspectives. Someone asked about the faculty, and I think, as you might expect, I think there's certainly some anxiety amongst the faculty. I think we're all returning from this thing that's been traumatic in a lot of ways, and I think that we all deal with it a little bit differently. And so we have tried to have an open dialogue with our faculty since the end of the spring. And so we have worked with faculty members to change spaces, to put folks in bigger spaces, to understand the concerns that folks have, and we'll continue to do that. Someone asked about if a student has a runny nose, will they be, and so I think we're gonna, there was also a question about an additional nursing staff, and we actually just put out a note today, and I think we will hire a second nurse, certainly for the first half of the school year, so that Karen has another set of hands as sort of her day-to-day, and the day-to-day of the health center will change. Someone asked about positivity rates, and we are certainly examining Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and I know that Governor Baker came out with that color-coded map, and Maine is doing a county by county color, and so we're taking all of those things into consideration. So someone asked about sort of the move to remote, and I think that if we were to get into a situation where we had a lot of activity, as I said, we have a metrics that that gets us from a class to a division to the whole school. I think there's a lot of talk right now about the winter and what the winter is going to look like. And I think especially if you have kids who are in college, because everyone is talking about kids are coming home for Thanksgiving and then not going back to school. I think part of that for colleges is they're going to work so hard this fall to get the kids there and keep the kids there and keep the kids as safe as they can. But then having kids go to all corners of the country and return for 3 weeks does not make a ton of sense for most colleges, I think. That also coincides with the height of, or maybe not the height, but certainly heightened, flu season and things like that. So we certainly look to the winter as a time when there's potential for us to return to a full remote. Again, I hope beyond hope that our fall goes well, that we figure it out, that we sort of make our way through. If we do have a case or two and we understand sort of how that plays itself out, and that we continue to do the best we can in the winter, in the hopes of remaining in school. But if I were betting that there could be a time of an extended remote period, I would say it'd be between January and March. Someone asked about private music lessons going to be offered. And the short answer is yes. Chip Harding, although he's sort of retired from his own teaching, he is coordinating all of the adjunct teachers. And so, I think we will try to do some things in spaces, bigger spaces. We will try to do some things potentially virtually. And I think we will continue to try to do them in and around when kids are free or unscheduled, and going from there. But more will come there, and checking in directly with Reagan and Chip Harding about getting music lessons settled. Whew. Well, I have said a lot. Like I said, I'm sure I have answered many questions, but I'm sure that there may be others. Someone just chatted about safety and safety measures, and absolutely, safety continues to be paramount for us. I think that most of you returning families will know that we're in the process in the middle and upper school of giving all the students fobs and having campus be locked down. And so while we will not start that way, we have a goal of like Indigenous Peoples Weekend to sort of have that in place around that time. We feel like adding that at the beginning right now would be just one more thing, but it is something that we still hope to proceed. Someone asked about the bus, and if you have a question about the bus, please reach out to John Douglas directly to see which buses have availability in terms of adding students to the buses. John Douglas, are you here?
I am here.
Here. So just as John has chaired sort of the health and safety, John, are there things in health and safety that I got wrong or that you want to add to?
No, I think you covered everything well.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked about the tent in the winter months, and so we're scheduled to have the tent now, I think, until December 1st. And part of it for us is we're going to see how exactly we use the tent, and then we do have the blue gym, which is roughly the same size of the tent, that we could transition to in the winter. We could also transition into, delivering food, to delivering food in a different way, and potentially kids eating in advisory or eating in classrooms once we're not able to eat outside. Someone asked about, was the emphasis on masks to say that gaiters are not acceptable? So yes, emphasis on masks. Yes, gaiters are not acceptable. Gaiters are not acceptable. And I am just looking at the chat. I know some people have put up, we have a couple more minutes, but And Arul, are you on the call still? Maybe not. He just left, Mira said. Okay. Well, with that, so for Mass students, yes, until you hear differently, Massachusetts students should plan. And like I said, we are actively working with a number of sort of agencies to sort of make sure that that's okay. But for yes, Mass students, you should be planning to attend. Awesome. I hope this was helpful. We so appreciate your partnership. Stay in touch. You know, for families, if you have questions, please be in touch with your division director. Those Zoom calls will be, well, I know there's a couple this week and a couple next week. I hope that you'll attend those. Those will be a little bit more nuts and bolts about division specific. But thank you all. We are so looking forward to being back with your kids and your partnership, and so thank you. It's always weird signing off on these calls. Have a great afternoon.